All right, guys, so this carries on our discussion in the class on Friday, and we're going to talk about the concept of objects and how we use them in JavaScript. And I cannot say enough how important this is for full stack, as well as for Kotlin and Android, and basically anytime you're working in IT. But let's restrict ourselves to JavaScript as it's used here in our introduction to Web Application Development MADS 4007. So all this stuff is in my book, The JavaScript Civilization, and let's carry on now. So I'll leave it to you to go and read through this by yourself, and then we're going to go through some exercises, and I'm just going to draw some pictures because pictures help us connect in terms of what's going on. So the way I think about an object now, it's like a box. It's a box into which we put some things. So, and this is true for Kotlin and Java and every other programming language as well. And into that box we put data. So we put data attributes. Right now you've been seeing data, whether it's primitive or, well, we're talking about objects now, so let's stick with primitive data for right now. But the problem with data attributes in a program is it's like they're like a deck of cards. Right, so if you have a deck of cards and then you scatter it on the floor, you lose the order, you don't really know how they relate to each other. So it would be good if we could bundle our objects together. In fact, one of the concepts they use in describing objects is the concept of the walled garden. So let's say that I have a certain business entity that I want to model, such as a shopping list. And I could have a variety of product that I want to buy, so I have some items. And those items might have names, like banana or carrots. And there might be a quantity, how many of them I want to buy, and they might have a price per unit. And you can imagine now that as this list grows longer, if I did not have objects, that would be a real mess to keep it organized. So let's see how this concept of the walled garden helps us to organize data in JavaScript or any programming language. Now, the way that you can contemplate, you can conceptualize a object. In Java, we do it in the following formulation. So we use curly braces, and then we have key value pairs. Right? So you could have grocery item, colon, and then its name, so bananas or something. And you could have several of these, and so on. You can also have functions, by the way. You can have methods in an object. We're not going to talk about that now. That is a full stack or a Kotlin concept, but you can have code as well. For right now, just for our introduction here, we're focusing only on data. An object in JavaScript is in this format, and this is called an object literal. So the exercises we're going to do now are object literal. They are key value pairs wrapped up in curly braces, and we can also put those in arrays, and then we can move them around from one part of the program to another. So visualize this, think as we go forward, that an object is a box, and that box is a walled garden, so it protects everything that's inside it. Now, JavaScript is not truly a strongly object-oriented language. It's weakly object-oriented. We don't, for example, have the concept of protection, like making things private and so on, that you'd see in Java. But JavaScript is good enough, and it's very fast and light for developing web applications. So this walled garden, or this box, we put all our data attributes in, and then if we have a number of them, we can put them in an array and we can move them around. Pause the video if you need, think about that, draw this diagram out by yourself, and then let's move on. So please go and read through this. Now, in business context, here in class, in this introductory class, we're just making some little simple examples. But when we get to full stack, we're going to find out that the things we're actually modeling here in our walled garden are business processes. And we'll see how we can design enterprise systems which are business processes. We can put business processes into this box, and then we can manage the business processes and we can create enterprise IT systems. But that's for later on, that's not for now. For now, we're just going to go with very simple, tangible, easy to visualize things, entities. These are actually called entities. And some of you might have jumped ahead a little bit. You might have made the connection that that sounds a lot like a SQL database record. And yes, there is something called the object data record equivalence principle. And you could conceptualize objects as being data records as well. And that's what we're doing here, isn't it? If we don't yet have methods, if we don't have code in our object, we're purely sticking with data records in our object. That is exactly the same as a SQL row set. In fact, database engines such as Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, right, all the big data engines out there, the big databases, that's what they do in code, and most of them are coded in the C programming language. They actually do use objects as the way they implement data records in code, but that's not our topic today. So now let's go and see how we can build some of these boxes, how we can create some of these walled gardens to implement our shopping list project by tying together, by binding, right? It's actually called binding. We can bind numerous related data attributes into this box. And if that sounds a lot like a SQL row set, then yes, that's what it is. So here, for example, if we were working with modeling the operations of a business in code, then customer would be one of our entities in an enterprise system. When I was at IBM, I worked on WebSphere Business Modeler, and that did this at a very sophisticated level. But the simple thing is not sophisticated. The simple thing is very kind of common sense, that if I'm going to manipulate the pieces of a business in software, I'm going to create entities which represent the business processes and the business data records of the enterprise. That's ultimately where this is going. So this is stuff we're going to get to later on in full stack, not today. Let's just go ahead with our business records, with our exercises to learn how to create JavaScript objects for the project. So that's what we said. It's a way of organizing data. And you can watch that explainer video, please. So we said that objects are key value collections of key value pairs. A JavaScript object is a collection of key value pairs wrapped up in curly braces. Think of it as a digital filing cabinet where each drawer contains specific information relevant to our business domain, which we're modeling. So there we could have all the records related to a customer. Customer could have an ID and note the use of the colon and note the use of the comma. And the last record does not have a comma. This is JSON, by the way. So this is a data description formulation called JSON. And you're going to be seeing a lot more of that in full stack when we work with MongoDB. So JSON is a data description language, just like HTML is a page description language. And JSON works with something called JSON parsers, which enforce schema. It enforces the grammar of JSON, just like a compiler enforces the grammar of your programming language. But once again, we don't need to know that stuff just yet. So each piece of data is a key, and then colon, and then corresponding value. So here we have some customers. In fact, you see here, now we have introducing arrays. Note how we're introducing arrays. And in JavaScript, arrays are just collections of stuff in square brackets. And that could be primitive, or it could be object in the sense of key value pair with the colon, but collections of data points separated by commas, wrapped up in square braces. So you see here we have the opening of our array and the closing of our array. And then within that array, we have several array entries. And note here we have JSON records. So we have key value pairs wrapped up in curly brace, and there's a comma separating it from the next one down. So this is a JSON record, and these several JSON records are wrapped up in an array, and the array is called customer. And in JavaScript, we're naming that array as customers, and we're going to see in a few minutes how we can add or remove or search for records in that array using JavaScript array methods. So accessing object data, and I'm just going to be emphasizing dot accessor notation for this class. There's more sophisticated ways we're going to need when we work in full stack, when we start using Node formulation of JavaScript, but for right now we're just going to keep it so simple and do this. So there we've seen now we're creating a customer array. Right, so that's an array. We're creating the 0th element, and there's the dot accessor notation. So if we had a record which was first customer dot name, first customer dot credit score, first customer dot is active. And bracket notation is another way to do it. You could have the array name, and then in brackets you could have the field name, and that's like similar in SQL. I guess you guys have taken some SQL for relational databases, and then you're familiar with those are the column names. But you know, that's later. Right now let's just use dot accessor. So here we're creating a function in JavaScript, and we're calling our function find customer by ID. And then we're passing some parameters into our function. And then we're implementing the logic of our function, so we're using a for loop. We're walking over, so we're saying for 0, so starting at 0 and going until we get to the length of the array. We're saying less than because when we get to equals, we would run out of array space because we've seen that arrays are 0-based indexing. If you don't totally understand this right now, understanding comes with familiarity, and familiarity comes with writing code. And then there we're incrementing our counter variable. I know you guys have not had programming before, but at some point you just have to jump in and start doing it. You have to go from not knowing it to starting to do it. There's no magic pill you can take. You just need to write the code and let your brain become familiar with it. Now here we're using an if statement. So when we're walking over all the elements in the array, at a certain point the ith, so the whatever position it is, second, third position, whatever, dot id, when that equals what we're looking for, then we're going to return, and that's the purpose of the function, to find a customer by ID. And if we walk through the whole array and we didn't find anything, we're just going to return null saying, well, sorry, no luck, we didn't find what you wanted. So here would be for displaying a certain customer. So we're saying display customer, we're passing in the customer array. And then we've seen the use of the template literal formulation. So in JavaScript, you can say $, open curly brace, close curly brace. And then if you put a data variable in there, let's say that customer, the dot name field of the customer object is John, then it would print out John. So here we're passing in the customer array, and then we're dumping out, we're applying the dot accessor notation. Here we're creating an array, so that's one way to create an array in JavaScript. So we're just saying open square brace, close square brace, there's nothing in it yet. So we now have a array, which is empty so far, and then we're walking over it. And then for all of the active customers, that is for each record, where the is active field is set to true, then we would push, right? So we would create another array now called active customers, which we did up there. And then we would add using JavaScript array methods. We would add that record to our active customers. Let's go and work through these labs now. But before I do this, and because it's Saturday night and we want to have a little bit of fun here, I'm going to briefly introduce you to something new, just because even though Node.js is not in our curriculum yet, but Node.js is JavaScript at the command line we can run in Visual Studio Code, and I've seen it helps many students to get a stronger visual. So if you want to go ahead and do this by yourself, first of all, you need to have Node.js installed in your computer, and you can just go and search for it, so Mac or Windows. And your URL is oh yeah, nodejs.org download. So you can go to right there, and then you can get the appropriate installer for your system. So just get Node.js, and then I'm running Windows, so it's sensing that. So you can just go ahead and download the Chocolatey, right? You could install it using Chocolatey. It's pretty straightforward. I'm sure you guys you can just fool around. You can ask Perplexity. If you have any questions, if you do want to install Node, you don't have to do it now. You're going to need it for a full stack. But if you want to get going with this, I think it would be a good idea to do. And get the LT. Well, actually, it doesn't really matter. You can get the current one, I guess. Or you could just go and get the Windows MSI installer. That's probably simpler. So anyway, I'm not going to demonstrate reinstalling it because I've got my Node.js set up in a certain way that I like it to be. I will just quickly show you how it works. So to begin with, let's start Visual Studio Code. So you guys up to now are used to thinking of JavaScript as running in the Chrome web browser, and it runs using something called Chromium DevTools. A smart guy named Ryan Dahl, I think it was in 2002 or 2003, he figured out that you could wrap up, and it's actually a Rust product. It's in a programming language called Rust. But Mr. Ryan Dahl, without the command line, meaning outside of the web browser. And you could go and read about that right there. Now, the way that you know you have Node, if you open a command line and you type Node, you should see something that looks like that. So how do you run JavaScript at the command line outside of the browser? And that lets you focus just on the JavaScript, not on having to make a web page and invoke it from HTML. How do you do that? So I'm going to go and make a new file here. I'll call it first.js. And I'll give it a simple command such as console.log. And I'll run that. So save. Now how do I run it? I'm going to open my terminal. Make sure I'm in the right directory. And I'm going to say node first.js. And then it's printing out hello. Now, if we want to work with arrays, because from experience I found arrays can be a little bit complicated for new learners, and if you can just focus purely on the JavaScript without having to wrap it up in an HTML page every time. Here, let's make an array. Let's save and run to make sure we don't have any compile errors. Now, something I can do in Visual Studio Code that I can't easily do in a web browser is use the debugger. So here I'm going to click in this left column, and instead of running, I'm going to say debug. So I'm going to go to my fourth icon from the top, which is run and debug. And I'm going to say run and debug in Node.js. You can also make your own Visual Studio Code extensions using Node, which is pretty cool. But for right now, let's just stick with this. And you see here, I now have a new thing that I did not have before, which is this set of controls. So the first one, if I click on that, it'll run the program to the end. If I click on the second one, it'll step over the current line. If I click on that, it'll step into the next line. If I click on that, it'll step out back to the point of calling. And I'm not going to explain these right now. I'm going to explain them when we're getting into them. There I could restart the session from the beginning, and there I could stop my debugger. And again, I know you guys are thinking I'm a new programmer. I don't know all this stuff, but I'm sorry, at some point you got to learn it. If you're here, presumably it's because you want to get a job as a developer, and at a certain point you have to stop saying, I don't know, and you just have to learn it. And I got to tell you guys a secret, because I know people that I used to work with back in the day, and they run talent agencies now that they hire developers and they present them to employers. And they're kind of scared of this new cohort of college graduates. And I'm not talking about you personally, I'm just saying what I've heard in general. It seems that in this modern sort of new age ethos, there is too much of a willingness to to sort of say, oh, I don't know, it's too hard, I can't do it. Back in my day, and I'm not old, so I'm a pretty young guy too, but back when, I was out there getting the first job, it was just more of a sensibility of the world, how the world worked, that you just had to sort of kick yourself in the butt, practice the code, and keep going till you learned it. And we did not have ChatGPT, right? So we didn't have the ability to do something like this. And then it's going to give me lessons, and I can go and run the lessons, and I can ask it to test me as I'm going forward. So you can do this. And if you don't want to do it, my suggestion would be life is short. Go and find something you can throw yourself into, because what employers are going to hire you for is to be excited about what you're doing. Right? We say we can always pay somebody to do the job, but you can't pay somebody to be excited about it. And if you're going to walk in, they say, why should I hire you? They say, well, or they ask, why should I hire you? You say, well, I'm excited about this technology. They're going to say, okay, well, tell me something you can show me which demonstrates you being excited, right? What's your proof of being excited? And then you can talk about some of the projects you're working on. So I'm going to go and run this program now. So I'm going to say, oh, actually, I'm still running my debug session from before. So I got to stop that. And now I'm going to run this new program. And it ran through all the way to the end because I didn't have any debug points. So they're outputting apple and cherry. Now I can drop some debug points. Oh, it's still debugging, so I have to stop my debugger. And now I'm going to say run and debug. There I am on my first line, let fruits equal, in square brackets, these elements. So I'm going to drop a watch on fruits. I'm going to select it, right click, and say watch variable so I can inspect it. And this is why we're doing this. This is what you can do in Node, which you cannot do in the debugger. You do not, even Chromium DevTools does not have a line debugger, but this does have, so that's pretty good. Where is my watch variables panel? I'll add to watch right there. Now you see over here, it's saying uncaught reference because I have not executed line 1 yet, so I'm going to say step over. And now fruits, it's showing me that that is an array. And then I can step to the next line. And it's starting to output stuff, so it outputted fruits 0 and fruits 2. So anyway, I'm suggesting that you do what I just did, which is install Node. And I'm going to spend the next little bit of time just talking about basic objects and arrays here. You're certainly free to copy it into make a web page, drop it into the script tag, and you'll be able to see the output. You just won't be able to see the line debugger. So anyway, let's carry on now and investigate how to make an object in JavaScript. So here on page 61, lab 1, making objects in JavaScript. And again, I could go and ask my ChatGPT mentor. In fact, before I ask that, I can ask it, explain to me what an object is in the context of JavaScript. So objects are very important organizers of data, so go and read, and if you don't understand or if you want it explained to you in another voice, you can certainly do that. Now I can say, ask me a test question to lock in my understanding. And because learning should be fun, you can ask your ChatGPT buddy to speak in a different voice. So I'm going to say, play the role of Mr. Spock from Star Trek, because I like science fiction. In the episode The Trouble with Tribbles, the Enterprise is overrun with the furry creatures. You were asked to model the Tribbles registry in JavaScript using an object. If each Tribble has a name, color, and sound it makes, how would you create a single Tribble object in JavaScript that represents one Tribble? And how would you access the sound it makes? Now, I'm going to ask you to pause the video for a couple of seconds and then come back and see how we do it together. And I got to tell you guys, if you don't like Star Trek, you better ask yourself what you're doing as a programmer, because Star Trek is very popular in programmer culture, and when you're at work, the other programmers are going to make jokes and references to Star Trek, and if you don't know what they're talking about, you'll feel left out. All right, so please take a couple seconds now to figure this out. All right, so let's think about this. So first of all, we need to make an object, and later on we'll see how we can put them in an array. And I see that students get frustrated because they think everything's supposed to happen right away. If you just slow it down a couple seconds and take your time and write it out on a piece of paper, as I've demonstrated over here, then it's going to be something your brain will be able to process. So I'm going to use Sublime Notepad to start designing this. And let's see what they want, what Mr. Spock is telling us to do. So we have two steps here. Step one is design our object literal. And step two is see how we're going to package it up in an array. Now you can refer back to your notes in JavaScript Civilization, but this is what we've seen in class a couple of times. So first of all, our object literal is what? It is something which is going to be in curly braces, right? Array is square braces. And that's a little thing students sometimes get messed up on, so just do whatever it takes to memorize that. And an object literal is a set of key value pairs in curly brace. And if you have several of them, then they're separated by commas. And so on. All right, so a tribble could look something like this. Tribble name. I don't know what tribbles are named. Maybe one's named Joe. And I think it's color and sound. And again, I'm not sure what color tribbles are. I think in the TV show they were all some sort of just gray or something, but I'll give them different colors here. And sound, I think they all just get like some little mewing noise or something. And we're also going to see now, we could, if we wanted, we could assign that to a variable. Let's see how that's going to work in Visual Studio Code. Under node control. And I think I'm still running my debugger from before, so I have to stop my debugger. Let's just try running this to make sure we're not getting any errors. No errors, cool. What happens if we try printing out that variable t1? And let's run it in the debugger. So I'll drop some debug points, and I'll go to my debugger, and I'll run and debug. So line 1, let's drop a watch on T1. And we'll step over. And T1 is our object literal. Now you see here that objects actually are arrays. There's a very tight relationship in JavaScript between objects and arrays. Objects are just arrays. The elements of the array are the data attributes, and later when we get to functions and methods, we're going to find out we could also attach functions as elements of the array to get methods. That's for later on. That's for full stack. So that's pretty much it. Congratulations. Celebrate a little bit. Do your little happy dance. You have now made a object in JavaScript and you've assigned it to a variable name. Now let's make an array. Well, arrays are about square brackets. So I'm going to say var tribble array equals, and I'll just initialize it to 0. I'll make a blank entity that doesn't have anything in it initially, and then I'll start adding stuff to it. And there's a variety of array methods you could use here, but I'm just going to, for right now, just do it like this. Now let's also drop triple array in our watch. So let's debug it. So step over. There's T1. And step over. It's just my console log, so I could go to my debug console and see what I'm logging out in that line. Now here I am, I'm making my triple array. So I've got it here, see it's undefined because I've not executed line 5 yet. So step over. And now I've set up my triple array, does not currently have anything in it. Line 7, I'm going to add my T1 variable. So step over, there we go. So my triple array now has one triple in it. It has Joe in there. And if you can do this, you can now do the project because everything after this is just building up. You got that, you're golden, you're all set, you have all the basic foundational skills. Now it's just a matter of the self-discipline to sit down and actually do this. And I've spoken to a lot of students over the years because I also teach career search. And, they have so much frustration. They say, oh, I'm applying to so many jobs and nobody's hiring me. And I ask them, how many hours did you spend last week sitting by yourself in a room practicing the programming skills which you want them to hire you for? Because I have been an interviewer in a couple of different companies, and the interviewer can tell everything that's going on with you the second you walk in. If you have passion and excitement, if your eyes are glowing a little bit, if you get into it, your voice raises a little bit with excitement when you talk about programming JavaScript, They will register that. And if you don't have that excitement, they will also register that. So whatever happens is purely on you. Don't blame it and say they're mean, they're unfair, they're discriminating against me, they're not giving me a chance. No, you're not giving yourself the chance if you don't do this prep work. All right, let's carry on. So basically, that is lab one. And you can go and run that, right? You can debug it, you can observe it in Chromium DevTools, but you've seen now, we've had the line debugger, and we've seen line by line what's going on in Chromium. So that's pretty much what it is. I want you to start thinking about Node.js as being your JavaScript X-Man superpower. Who's your favorite X-Man character? Mine is Iron Man because he has this augmented reality, computer enhanced vision. He can look at a wall and see through the wall with heat vision and all that, IR vision. Well, that's what the line debugger in Visual Studio Code using Node.js is. It is your augmented reality X-Man supervision to see behind the code to what's going on at the interpreter level of the language. Remember, we were doing this in class, right? We were inspecting the bomb because here you're getting a visual on the bomb, and we were seeing what's happening. Now, this doesn't have any buttons, it doesn't have any events yet, but that is what is your interaction between JavaScript. See right there, that's being written out. And because this is server side, you're not seeing any code here. You're just seeing the final rendered, written out version of what's going on. So there in our JavaScript portion of our DOM, we're creating, just like we did in Node.js, right? We're creating a JSON data record, which is an object literal, right? Note your object literal here. And then you're going to your BOM document element. You're finding the selector corresponding to the part of the page you want to pour this out into. There it is. And you're using the .accessor notation to update the text content. And then you're outputting this string. See, there it is between the between those single quotes. And use single quotes. There's reasons why I don't use double quotes. I'll tell you why that is later on. But there's my quotes, and then everything within there is going to get written out. All right, that's about it. That's all I can think of to say. Let's carry on. So that's lab one. So here we're just accessing properties. So again, I'll leave it to you to go and do this as a web exercise. I will demonstrate using Node. So .accessor could look something like this. So here's my array. Let's add another thing to the array. Let's make another tribble. And now let's add triple 2 to our array, and let's run it to make sure we don't get some compile errors or something yet. Actually, it's an interpreted language, so interpreted errors. So we'll save and run. Save. And I'm not going to debug it just yet. I'm just going to run it down here. So I'm going to my terminal view. And I'm going to say node and then the name of my program. And there, as before, you see here I'm getting my see the square brackets, that means array, and the array has these two elements. Now suppose I just wanted Sarah. I don't want the Joe array, the Joe tribble, I just want the Sarah tribble. Well, I could say, because we know that arrays are zero base, so if I want the first one, I could access that index as 0. And if I want the second one, I could access it as the first element. Let's try running that. Save and run. Now I'm just going to make a little comment here, a little observation. If programming is your thing to do, you will find this very interesting, just like here at whatever it is, midnight on Saturday night, when a normal person would be out clubbing or something, 11 o'clock on Saturday night. I'm making this video because I'm very interested in this stuff. I love working with it and talking about it and teaching it. And if you can sit down in a room by yourself without a professor waving their finger to keep your attention focused, then programming is your thing. It takes a huge amount of internal motivation. People say programming is hard. I don't know. I never got that, but I've heard people say it's somehow stressful or whatever. If you think of it that way, then do not become a programmer. You will hate it. You might, by luck, get hired somewhere, but after 6 months or a year, you're going to quit because you just won't be able to force yourself to go and sit in that job every day. On the other hand, if you find this very interesting to penetrate your thoughts into the reality of doing this, if you like it, if you feel an internal vibe, right, if it sort of speaks to you internally in your mind and your interest, then be a programmer because this is what you're going to be doing all day, every day. All right, so let's go and try running this. And there we see we're getting the first one, which is Joe, and the second one, which is Sarah. And we are accessing our elements like this. Now let's go and make another tribble. Let's see how we're going to add our next tribble into here. So I can say tribble array, and again, Visual Studio Code is helping me out with intelligent code completion. And I have my first two elements, so now I'm going to say square bracket 2, because that's going to be the third element, equals. And then I can add in my T2. Let's run that to make sure it's no compile errors, no interpreter errors. Okay, good. Now, again, we could go and output our third element. All right, so you see here now I've said console.log, and notice that that is a backtick because I'm using string interpolation. So I'm taking my variable, which is tribble array square brackets 2. I'm putting it in a curly braces because I want the value of that to be printed out. And those are not quotes. Pay attention, those are backtick. So the backtick symbol is here. On my keyboard, it's that key right there. So just make sure you use a backtick when you're using string interpolation. And let's run that. And now you see it's outputting whatever's the value of that. Let's see if we can use dot accessor notation to get name. So that is a object, and if I want a field from the object, dot accessor notation. Oops, it's what do we call it? Triple name? Yeah, triple name. Okay, pay attention to that subtle mistake I made. Previously, I forgot to put the dollar sign. So if you want variable interpolation, then you take the variable name, you wrap it up with curly braces, and then I forgot to put the dollar sign, and then when we run that, then we get the interpolation, which is Sarah. And if I now inject the third triple there, we should see the name is Bill. Very cool. So anyway, that is constructing objects. That is using the dot accessor notation. That is your project requirement. See if there's any new cool stuff I can tell you here that I haven't talked about. That's pretty much it. So if you want to get yourself going with Node to get a jump on full stack and then practice playing with the debugger. Oh, well, here's one other thing I could do. Instead of doing these individual, like printing it out one at a time, I could walk over the contents of the array, which I think we showed you in some of the code. So here's something to be aware of. One of the flow of control structures in JavaScript is the for loop, and a for loop simply works like this. That would be the most basic for loop. And whatever goes there, that's an execution context. So that is the code that will run, and that is the controller that controls the execution of the for loop. And you can see we have 2 semicolons there, so we have 1, 2, 3 execution contexts. So customarily those are used to control the operation of the for loop. So I could put my controller here, right? I could say for let I equals 1 if I want I to be a variable controlling how many times my for loop executes. And then here, I could increment my for loop. If I forget to do that, I'll have an infinite loop. So a convenient way to do that is to just say loop counter plus plus. And the guy in the middle, he's like the security guard. He either lets the loop proceed or no. And that has to execute, that has to evaluate to true for the loop to keep going, or false when we want it to stop. So what condition can we put there that will be true initially but false when we get to the end? Well, we could say that I has to have some relationship to the number of elements in the triple array. And there is a property of an array called length. So we could go and access the length. And then we could say while I is less than the array of the length, then that mechanics will work to walk over each element of the array. And here I could do console dot log, and I'm going to put my backticks, and I could actually I don't even need that because I'm just going to output the value here directly. So I could say triple array and in this case I want the index corresponding to the letter I. All right, let's see how that works. And then it's outputting each of my triples, and if I wanted, I could use dot accessor notation to just get the field. Another way I could do it, as we saw in our lab book, in addition to dot accessor notation, I could do it this way. So instead of saying dot and then the field name of triple name, I could put square brackets and I could reference the field name in quotes, and that would have the same effect. All right, so that's pretty much it. Now let's go and just make sure you're set up to do the rest of the lab exercises. You have everything you need to go and work through them. That was lab 2. There was an example of accessing an array element by field name. And you could go and update, right? So you could go and work through this, update an existing property by just assigning to it objects as data buckets. So we bundle related pieces of data as you're doing in the shopping list. So we saw that with our triples exercise. We could put our objects in an array, which you've also seen. And we've seen the use of the for each loop. If you wanted to update an object, you would just assign to it. So here we made an array of object literals. We'll get into JSON later on. So JSON.stringify is a way that you can convert between a JSON and an array. And here's some more complicated, or not really complicated, but some additional methods we can call an array. So go and work through that. And then you can find things by using. Anyway, just go and work through the code, right? Me talking about it is going to be less valuable than you just going and working on it. And then let's finally run this last little bit of code, which is going to get you pretty much to doing your project. All right, guys, so go and work through this by yourself. You're the one who has to learn this stuff. And if you have any questions, ping me on Slack.